Hello, I'm
Uh,
Wyatt with Rooted in Sound, and I am here to introduce us to Jeremy,
Hello.
who is one of the new practitioners here. And Jeremy is going to be offering some services, some private services, as well with some groups. So, Jeremy, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your background?
Sure. I grew up in the South Hills, and I grew up in a musical background. Both sides of my family either sang or played instruments. So I had singers on both sides, and I had instrumentalists on both sides as well. I grew up in the church, playing music in the church as well, and then in high school, I was also part of different ensembles, chorus, and the spring musical, and so I decided to study music at the University of Pittsburgh and West Virginia University, thinking I was going to be a classical singer and a multi-instrumentalist. And then I really got into music history and music theory. So I ended up moving to Los Angeles to UCLA to study musicology, music history and theory, and music criticism. And where it starts to lean into our work and doing sound therapy is that I was very much into the theory of music and also a little bit of the mysticism, you might say, the metaphysics and the philosophy behind it, because I was really focused on Renaissance music and Baroque music, which is where a lot of our modern theory comes from. But over the course of graduate school, I kind of ended up going down these different metaphysical musical rabbit holes, which very much got me interested in, especially in Western culture, how far back music was spoken of and written of as a healing practice and as a sort of mystical practice and as a way to come back to the bigger or cosmic sense of self.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about the sound healing path and what led you down this path here?
Yeah, properly. When, as a touring musician, because from about 2013 to 2020, I was touring as a musician fairly regularly. And when 2020 popped up, I was really thinking about how I could both expand my musical practices and really integrate them with a lot of the metaphysical and spiritual curiosities and interests and passions that had developed over that time. And so I took a certificate in sound healing from the Globe Institute in the Bay Area. And so a lot of these things that I had already been studying, maybe through a little bit of an academic or intellectual background or a philosophical background, was really like, oh, yeah, sound is an ancient tool from all cultures that helps us go from feeling, maybe we want to use the terms dysregulated or uncentered, to a more centered space, and is a place to explore and to be in one's interior space, I think is a good way to say it. You get to go from whatever concerns or distracts ourselves from the outside and then take time for interiority.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about what makes your practice different than some of the other sound healers that are out there?
Well, notably, a lot of sound healers have really learned from and taken in a lot of the Eastern practices, and they're very sacred and very venerable, say from Tibet and Nepal, South Asia generally. They have been very influenced by Vedic tradition, by various Buddhist and Hindu traditions as well. And while I've studied a bit of that, a lot of what I'm interested in, especially lately, is that we who have Western lineage also have mystical traditions and mystical practices. So a lot of what I'm interested in is going back to, say, the Pythagorean tradition, which has been so emphasized academically and in the mind, but not necessarily as a mystical tradition, right? That sound is a form of geometry that can regulate and help us center ourselves, that it really was a mystical tradition. And definitely contemplative and mystical Christianity. Because mysticism, whether we're talking about Sufism or Christianity, has to do with a very personal relationship with the divine. And that uniqueness of the soul's experience into getting into like a divine space is something that I'm very passionate about. So I use my voice, and I will use the instruments that I'm trained in, which are the various gongs and bowls and percussion. But my sacred space is really based on that sort of sonic sacred geometry and that sort of creating a sphere that is from my traditions and my training, based in especially the Pythagorean pre-Pythagorean traditions.
And so tell me a little bit about, those Pythagorean traditions.
Right,
and
right.
A little bit about...
Well, one part that I love especially, because sound therapists and sound healers, we have research-based evidence of how sound healing and sound therapeutics work on the body. But what we're continuing to connect is that the ancient roots of math and science and physics come from mystical traditions. So the tradition that in Pythagoreanism, the divine is 1, 2, 3. These are qualitative as well as quantitative ways of understanding that the universe uses patterns and sounds and angles. And one of the best evidences for this is cymatics, where, right, if you use the technology of putting sand or water to oh my goodness, it's a speaker. Mm-hmm. And then you vibrate it and you just move the tones, you'll see the geometry right there. So it's what's happening to our different bodily systems. And so I think it's a really great way of wedding and letting the sort of intellectual mind take a break and realize that there's both very scientific and mystical subatomic experiences happening. And there's no excluding either one from each other. They really get to talk to each other. And so the ancient roots of math and science in the Greek and the greater Mediterranean, and let my awareness do the healing and the balancing work that's possible.
So tell us what someone might expect when they come in for a session with you.
The client's life and their goals, and maybe what they've experienced, whether it's sound therapeutics or other healing practices, other wellness practices. When you're on the table with me, we start by going into the most fundamental forms of sacred space, which is, if you know the sigil of the sun, there's a circle and a point. I create that point as a sphere, as a completely 3+ dimensional space from which we are aware to do our healing work. And so from there, through intentional breathing and visualization, we kind of create what your essence or your soul looks like geometrically. And there's lots of traditions that I want the client to bring. If they don't have any, we start out with the simple dimensions of the point above, below, and left and right, back and forth and center, the 7 sacred points. And from there, I do toning. We explore the vowel range, much like how in the Eastern tradition there's different vowels that go along with the different chakras. That also, those 7 points are also spoken of in Greek and Egyptian traditions. And then from there, between toning and the using of different instruments, I also invite the client to tone and sing along and let their own voice be a sort of feedback. And so over time, I like to sometimes do a few different layers. It's the same way you kind of do a general sweep of the body, take a moment and see how that feels. And then we might go to particular areas. And depending on, say, we use elemental bases here in healing, we can use the tetrahedron, right? That four-sided equilateral triangle to ascend or descend the fire element, right? Or we can use the octahedron, which is that 8-sided pyramid that goes up and down and has those 7 points with those 3 axes to deal with where you want to have an open, spacious consciousness. So these are things that you could study in geometry in 10th grade, but they are also real mathematical, scientific, and mystical space holders, where with that visualization and that surrender into something that's so fundamental, recalibration and balance and healing can take place.
Thank you. It's very. I had an experience with your sound, and the setting of those intentions and the use of your voice with the other instruments was really impactful. And I would say that I had a very sweet session. I was able to go deep and felt very rejuvenized afterwards. What experiences have you had with sound healing in your personal life?
In what I might call like moving from like that mind or that like, wow, this is really interesting to me. That's definitely a little bit of how I'm built. It starts out with a curiosity. I go down the rabbit hole, and then that curiosity makes me understand that like you can know about it, you can have the information about it, but it needs to be embodied and experienced, especially in the past, say, 6 to 8 years. And so I'm someone, and my mother's the same way. We just hum and sing and do that sort of vocal biofeedback all the time, just because having the sound of your own voice is so comforting. Mm-hmm. The same way that when we're very small, the way that our parents gently and sweetly, or whoever your caregiver is, the voices around you, create a safe space. So me just humming around, and my mom humming, and my dad being a guitarist and a singer, it was like the voice is one of the most fundamental ways of soothing. But then I also found a lot of peace the way that a lot of traditions do, contemplating basic form and geometry. And sacred geometry was my way into getting, well, music theory and sacred geometry seem to be wanting to sing and speak and view and hold each other simultaneously. And so I started just playing around. I purchased an antique singing bowl, and I purchased a quartz bowl. And I just started experimenting the way I would if I was playing a song on the guitar or the piano. And I was like, this gets back to like the myths of Orpheus, soothing animals and nature and playing with nature in this way that our present society and civilization is having to remember. again after all the industrial revolutions and all the ways that we've gotten dysregulated in society. It's like we've been trying to go back to nature and thus ourselves. And so these traditions made me want to study sound healing. It's like, well, what are all the ways that I can do this for myself and facilitate this for others? And so that's what inspired me to get the certification for sound healing.
Thank you for taking a couple of minutes to introduce yourself to those out there that are interested in sound. And we look forward to hearing more about you, your practice, and the impacts in which we may have on our communities.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks.